Today's guest on the Life and a Living podcast is the very interesting Scott Barlow. Now, Scott is the founder of an organization called Happen to Your Career. And what Scott does and his company does is that really helps people prepare and determine what their next career move is, whether that's continuing within their existing career or if it's going out, setting up their own business, whatever it might be. But it has a complete process where he actually helps people to determine the direction they should be going in so that they understand exactly what their career path they're looking for. They know exactly what sort of organizations that they want to join, and it actually makes the whole process so much smoother. He also talks quite a bit, which is really interesting and fascinating from the other side of it, is that how do you hire? What are the things you need to do to hire, and then more importantly, to retain top talent, which is a challenge for organizations. And he's got a lot to say about why people leave organizations, why people leave jobs, why they stay sometimes in jobs longer than perhaps they should, and they can start to become ineffective, even though they may still be a relatively high performer. And he also talks about the 6 keys to career happiness, which is really, really interesting to hear what that is. So whether you're an employer or whether you're an employee, this is really for you. It's loads and loads of content. And I know for sure and for certain that we'll be coming back to Scott and to have another interview because he was such a great guest and he's got so much to say on the subject, which is such an important subject for all of us. So if you want other great interviews, you can go to the website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, and you'll find loads of good interviews with some great people that I've been very fortunate to interview. And we'd also ask you, if you're enjoying the podcast, go onto iTunes and give us a good rating and a good review, because that really helps us to bring our message to more people. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy the very, very interesting and articulate Scott Barlow. Scott, you're very welcome here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. So you're extremely welcome to this podcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And I know we've already started chatting earlier and I've had a ton of fun so far. So I'm even more excited for this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back because your company is called Happen to Your Career, which I think is a great title, by the way. But I want to come back and talk about that. But one of the things I know is that you spent 1 year studying human happiness and you rated it every day. So my question is, firstly, why did you do it? And secondly, what did you discover?
Well, there's several reasons why I started doing that in the first place. One of them was because I created a company where the number one reason people were coming to us was because they were interested in having much more happiness in their career and ultimately the areas of their life that their career impacted too. And one of the things that I was finding as I got several years into running this organization is that I went through a period of time where I was experiencing less happiness with my work than what I thought I would. So I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. This can't happen. I need to be able to walk the walk, and I need to be able to make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. So
this is slightly damaging to the brand if I can't actually put my hand up and say, yeah.
And it just made me feel a little bit like a hypocrite in some ways. And it made me feel very like, how am I going to be able to continue helping people if I don't feel that, I'm leading the charge for my own happiness in one way or another. So it was a bit of a challenging couple of months that led up to that. And then I started realizing that, hey, even though I understand many areas that impact my happiness, I don't necessarily understand all of the ones that are causing the, levers to be moved up and down. So how do I resolve this? And for me, I will go and try and learn everything on a particular subject. So I ended up reading, oh my goodness, I think it was about 50-ish books on happiness and happiness psychology and difference between meaning and happiness and you name it. Some really, really amazing books. And someplace in one of them in particular, I started thinking about, like, how could I record this? Because a lot of those books were by people like Daniel Gilbert, who is a well-known psychologist, and he does a lot of research that I'm a huge fan of and have learned a lot from and benefited from tremendously. And I started thinking about, like, how could I apply more of this research-driven approach to my own life, and realize that for something like happiness that's so subjective and is completely different by one moment to the next moment to the next, like, how on earth am I going to start to track that? So I finally settled, okay, well, I'm going to be able to at least measure it. Just start by measuring it once a day and in a few different areas. So I literally defined a few different categories, and actually have the journal that I was using sitting right over here, just to my right, and said, okay, I'm going to just continue to do this for an extended period of time. It started out as just 1 month, and then 1 month led to 2, led to 3, and so on, and started paring down what were some of the most specific areas that were impacting my happiness. And the cool thing was, at the time I was reading so much, I was starting to see how some of the research actually paired up with my own life and my own work. And a few things came out of that. One, I realized that I had, because I felt like I needed to, as the leader of my organization, taken on some things that were pretty draining for me. We'll put it that way. That were well outside my strengths and were great for growth and development, but just honestly were well beyond capacity. Like, at the time, I realized that I was getting really, really, really into the details for analytics and things like that, because we didn't have an analytics person on our team at the time. And somebody needed to do it. So I grabbed a hold of it, and I was just drained, 30 minutes into it. And I was not enjoying life, and that was impacting the rest of my day. And that's just one small example, and happy to talk about and share more pieces.
Well, what are we actually measuring? What are we actually measuring? You're saying you're measuring it every day. What were you actually measuring?
I'll tell you what, I'll grab it and I'll share a couple. So as I went through, I was trying to keep it super simple, because one of the things that I found for myself, and you might feel the same, I'm always curious about how people have any kind of journaling or self-awareness practices in general. But for me, I decided, hey, I need to keep it really, really, really super simple. So I literally made this happiness spectrum on the front side of the journal.
Okay.
And on one side, I felt like at that moment that I was doing the rating, I was flourishing and thriving. And at 0 level, so that was a 10, it was a scale of 1 through 10. 10 is flourishing and thriving, and 0 is consistently unhappy and or depressed.
So you'd score yourself on a range of 0 to 10 every day.
Yeah. And then the couple other things that I was measuring too was how stressed I felt.
Right. Okay.
And I had a separate rating for that, and also a recovery rating at the same time, because I started noticing halfway through that part of this for me was linked to sleep and rest and recovery. And there were a couple other things that were built into that too. And was I getting to spend more time working in my strengths? One of the things that I knew long before I even started this practice in measuring my happiness was that there's a ton of great research out there to support that if you spend as little as 1 to 2 more hours per day working in your strengths, then that changes your quality of life in a lot of different areas. It makes you feel more more happy more often. We'll put it that way, because happiness is not a destination, as it turns out. Happiness is a fleeting feeling in many different ways and fluctuates up and down at any given moment. However, it does cause people to feel happier at any given point, measured randomly throughout the day. It also causes people to actually be more productive in many different ways. So this is just like literally 1 more hour per day of working in your strengths. And what I had found that I had done was I had removed several hours of that.
Yeah. So it's the learning for all of us, because I'm just curious when you're talking about that, because just yesterday I was involved in doing something in regard to my own business that is way out of my comfort zone. I'm all for kind of pushing, but I just kind of thought, this is something that I really should not be doing. This is really something I am not going to use this. I only got involved in this because, yes, I want to kind of understand the structure, but this is just not something I thought, you know what, this was actually a bad use of my time because it was something that I don't like. I
Yeah.
will never like it because I just fundamentally don't like that sort of work. And I thought, there's a couple of hours that I've probably given to something that I really shouldn't have. So is it by focusing on doing the things that are really in your lane, as I would say, that are things that are kind of really play to your skills? That's what and that contributes to your happiness.
Well, so let's untangle this for just a minute here, because it's actually fairly complex, but there are a couple really simple pieces or simple ways to think about it. So yes, if you spend more time working in those areas of your strength, then you are generally going to experience higher levels of happiness, higher levels of all the good things that we want out of life in one way or another. Also, you're going to be able to make a often better contribution, not just through higher productivity, but because often those areas of your strengths, and when I say strengths, I'm not talking about skills. A lot of times
Yeah.
when I mention strengths, people think about, okay, well, I am great at, doing data and analytics and pivot tables, but honestly, I don't want to make pivot tables for the rest of my life. That doesn't make me happy. So what on earth are you talking about here? And instead, we're talking about those areas that are far underneath the surface that cause you to be more predisposed to be better at making pivot tables.
Mm.
So for example, something that I personally can't help but do. I spend the vast majority of my day thinking about the future. And well, that's true for a lot of human beings to spend a portion of their day thinking about the future. I pretty much live in the future. One of my strengths is to be incredibly future focused, and then to start combining that together on a very, very strategic level. I'm really, really happy when I get to do that. So back when I was in HR leadership, way back when, that was great for things like, predicting future trends for the workforce and anticipating needs, 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now, and building plans around that to be able to meet those future anticipated needs.
Okay. So when you recognize that you're kind of really hotspot for you is actually about the future. So does that mean then when you're looking at your organization, and I want to come back and talk about the business that you run, but does that mean then for your organization, you then select people that have got the complementary blend of skills and knowledge and expertise and everything else? Is that what you do?
Yes, I think so. But when you're talking about that, are you talking from my personal organization when I'm
Yes, your
hiring people,
organization, your
or?
own organization. Yeah, when you're looking to get people in to work in your organization, say, okay, that's kind of my lane. That's what my expertise and but I need somebody maybe on the data side that is actually going to do that, or I need somebody on the business development side, or whatever. Do you then kind of look for those complementary skills?
I do, those complementary skills, but also complementary strengths.
Yes.
Because I'm so future focused and I so love conceptually, which is another area that I excel at. It makes me really rather terrible with the details in many different ways. And getting back to that example where I just found myself drained all the time over a period of that couple months, that was not a fun time for me, was not entirely, but partially because I was embedding myself into the details really, really consistently and denying myself the areas that I naturally am much more talented or
Mm.
gifted in. And then that was it was not great for the business either, quite frankly. So yes, in short, I had to hire and identify people that were complementary to that, not
Yeah.
just in skills and not just in strengths, but also in fit for the business
Oh yeah, I
at
think
the same
fit is
time.
just such a big part. But coming back to your business, happened to your career. I mean, you, in very simplistic terms, you help people determine their ideal career, be that as an employee or whether they actually go to become a business owner. How do you actually go about helping people to find the right thing for them? Because in my experience, very often people can be discontent where they are. They
Yeah.
may not know exactly why they're discontent, but they don't know how to kind of find a route and a path to get themselves to the place they ideally would like to.
As it turns out, it's much, much easier to identify what we don't like or don't want
Yeah.
and some of the reasons that make us discontent, as opposed to identifying what we actually do want or do need instead. That's a much more challenging
Mm.
problem. And it's a much more complex problem too. So we use uh, we use a variety of tools and strategies to do that. But here's a way to think about how we actually help people identify what's right for them. We think about it in terms of, how do I create the ideal career or the ideal opportunity or the ideal, business or the ideal role for me? And to be able to do that, you have to understand what makes up the ideal role. And there's some sides of it where we all need as human beings. For example, really we all need some level of variety in our business. That changes pretty drastically from one person to another what
Mm.
that actually means. But if we don't have, just as it being a human being, if we don't have some level of variety in our work, then it's not going to feel very fulfilling for any length of time. So that's one example. Another example would be if I'm not getting, if I can't see whether or not I'm winning in my work, then I'm not going to feel very fulfilled for any length of time too.
Mm.
If I can't directly see and connect how I'm helping other people, then it's not going to feel very purposeful, or it's not
Mm.
going to feel very meaningful for
Yeah.
any length of time. So those are just a few
Yeah.
examples
To go
of
back to what
what
you're
we
saying,
want.
sorry, cutting across, but
Yeah.
I'm just really interested because one of the things you said there about winning, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that I find working with my clients is that I often ask them, okay, what's your version of winning? What does winning actually mean to you? And for the vast majority of people that I ask that question of, they
Yeah.
find it really hard to answer it. Is that your experience?
That's what I was going to ask you. What is the result when you ask that question? So I'm so glad that
well,
you
well, it can
dove
often
into
be
that.
a long pause, which
Yeah.
which follows because people struggle to actually really define what winning means for them.
We find that we have a lot of clues within our strengths.
Hmm.
Your strengths, when you really think about them, and I almost think about the iceberg method if you want to
Hmm.
apply it to an iceberg. Remember how earlier I was talking about the difference between skills and strengths? Skills are what we see above the surface. Strengths are what we see below the surface.
Hmm.
So let me give you a couple examples. Here's somebody that we worked with a while back. She was an executive um, for a pretty large company that worked in sustainability and engineering and just that space. She had promoted pretty rapidly, moved up the chain over a period of 8 years, just very, very quickly, and had a rather large team underneath her at this point. And when when we first started working with her, she really didn't have a clue what that winning looked like or what she needed in the next role. And what we found instead, as we started working with her, that some of the things that she was phenomenal at, just absolutely loved more so than anything else, was when she got to do, well, actually, there were about three things. One was being able to develop and teach other people. She had to have a high portion of her day with that type of interaction. Like
Hmm.
that really filled her up. And we could get into all the specifics and everything like that, but that's part of what it was. And then two, she needed to be able to, I'm going to call it, be able to have the challenge of selling an idea or a concept or something to someone else. She just got a lot of gratification when she was able to do that. And almost like, think about it in terms of, for her, it was almost like bringing other people into the mix and having the light bulb go off in
Hmm.
one way or another. And she did that through being able to influence and sell. And eh, but it was about being able to have that light bulb type moment for different people. So those were two examples of the things that she was missing in the role that she was in. So we had to say, okay, well, part of the reason that you that you need these is because those are things that you're rather great at, far, far better than the average person. And for her, she just always looked at those as like, can't everybody sort of do
Yeah,
these
yeah,
things?
yeah.
Which is often the often the case. We often undervalue and underrate our strengths because to us, we're in the middle of it and we sort of think like, this is easy. It's no big deal. And that's usually a clue that we're on to the right mix. But she was, even in portions of her role where she wasn't supposed to be doing these things, she was finding ways to come back and do them. And that's one of the,
so you've identified, let's play with that example. You've identified those couple of elements, their skills, their talents, their strengths. You identify that. So then how do you go from we have that. How do we then plot the journey to actually find the perfect role for that person?
It's a great question. It's also one that I'm going to give an initial answer that everyone hates because it depends. However, I want to give you some examples to help you understand how it actually happens. There's a slightly different journey for every person, every individual, and I can give you some of the commonalities. So when we're working with people, we go through that initial step of not just their strengths, but also what are the other pieces that they need or must have, and we divide it into a few different areas. Areas like relationships, for example. And I'm not just talking about like relationships with, friends or your boss or things like that, but who are the types of people that you want to be surrounded by if you're going to spend a large portion of your time working or a large portion of the time in your career in one way or another, whether you are the owner of a business or whether you're working with a team of people. If we know who those people are, then that gives us clues as to where we want to find our destination. So, between relationships and environment, and when I say environment, I'm talking about things like not necessarily just your physical environment, although that's important. Like for me, example, I have to have constant exposure to sunlight. Otherwise I get grumpy. This is another thing that I learned over a period of time. But also culture, what type of culture do you want to be surrounded by? What does that look like? And as we go through these different areas and begin to chop up what are some of the pieces that we must have, it gets easier to answer this question of where do I actually want to go? Okay. What do I actually want? What does winning actually look like for me? Okay. And part of the reason it's so difficult to answer is because it's such a multifaceted question. There's so many variables to it. You just simply can't answer it in one fell swoop. You have to divide it up into really specific areas, and that becomes much, much more manageable, where I can say, oh, well, I want to be surrounded by the types of people that are intelligent. They care about a particular cause and are really passionate about a particular cause. I can start to answer that question. And what that does for them is it creates what we actually use a tool inside our business to help people create what we call an ideal career profile. But that gives us a picture of what the ideal career looks like for them at whatever level. And once we have a picture, that begins to give us a destination, because
you know where you're going then at that stage. So if you take it then from the other side, okay, so that's the individual that you work with, but looking at it from the other side is the person that hires them, right?
Yes.
So how do you attract, and more importantly, how do you retain the best talent?
This is such a great question, and I feel like we could chat for 9 or 10 or 15 hours on it here. Right. However, I want to share with you a couple things that we've learned over the years, because we have been really fortunate to work with top performers all over the world. We just with the type of podcast that we've built, we have a tendency to attract top level talent all over the place. I didn't anticipate that we were going to do this. It just happened over the course of the last 8 years. And what that's done for us is these people come to us and have really deep conversations about what they want, things that they are only telling their spouse over the dinner table, sometimes in things that they don't even tell their spouse or partner in many different ways. So we get to hear the reasons what that is causing them to leave what would be otherwise known as best places to work, or what they're missing out of their lives, or what they think they want. And that buried within that are some of the secrets that we don't all know to retaining the best talent. So you've seen a billion different studies out there that say, hey, your boss is one of the biggest reasons why you stay or go, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's probably
Is that
heard some of
true?
those studies. Well,
I'm sure it
it's
can
like
be
an
true.
incomplete answer.
Yeah.
There is truth to it, but it is an incomplete answer. Interestingly enough, here's one of the things that we found as we began conducting our own research over the last few years on this. We found that actually, um, it is almost overly true in some different ways. And we're only going to focus on top talent here for just a
Mm.
second.
Yeah.
We see that it sways one way or another if we're not only focused on top performers. We see that top performers as a whole often are a pretty loyal bunch of people. And a lot of times they will overstay because of a boss, even though that they're unhappy for as much as 3 years before they do something
And is that
about it.
because of the relationship they have with the boss?
That is because of the relationship that they have with the boss.
Okay.
So what we find is that during that 3 years, they start, their attention starts waning and they become less effective. And even though they're often meeting and exceeding their boss's needs, like if you ask their boss, then their boss is like, "Oh my goodness, this is the best person on my team, like hands down.
Mm.
Like this person could do no wrong in all intents and purposes." However, what they're telling us is like, I'm only like spending 25 or 40 hours, and my attention more and more and more so is going someplace else. And they're not meaning to. Like, these are people that really legitimately want to do a great job for their organization, and sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing that, is the other thing that we find. But more and more and more, their attention's getting captured by other places, and then this even starts to cause them to be overwhelmed as well. So there's a lot of different facets to that. But here's a couple of the things that we have found that make a major difference as it relates to retaining or attracting the right people. So, they're staying for the pay, they're staying for the people that they like, they're staying for because they don't know what else they would do instead, because they haven't answered that "what does winning look like for me" question. But some of the biggest reasons why they leave is that work is not actually meaningful for them. It's become less and less and less meaningful, and it's become less and less intertwined with their lives. So, example, um, recently we just talked to somebody the other day who was promoted 3 times at Google and then left because she didn't want to be focused on what she called increasing clicks. She's like, I just want to be helping others, is what she told us.
Yeah.
I don't want to be focused on like, how do we get more clicks? That's not fulfilling for me. And Google's an amazing place to work
Yeah.
for so many different people, right?
So when you were saying that, there are two things said there. One's that you said, I stay for the pay, but I leave because of meaning. So how do those two play off against each other? Does kind of staying for the pay win out more than I'm leaving because for lack of meaning?
It wins out for a long period of time. We usually see that that time period ranges from as short as 3 months to as much as 3 years. And then you get some of the outliers where people have stayed for like 15 years
Yeah.
or 20 years because they
Yeah.
didn't know what else they would do, and were worried that they would be able to find as good of a situation as it relates to pay or stability or providing for the lifestyle that they want to lead as well.
And typically in that cycle, when do or is maybe there isn't a typical, but is there in that cycle that people actually come to you and say, "Hey, Scott, listen, I'm really done with this. I just got to do something." I've even talked to the wife or my husband about it as well over the dining room table. But I need is that within the kind of 3 year, or is it beyond the 3 year?
This is so interesting. This is fascinating to me, as you can tell. However, I think the really fascinating part is they often don't come to that conclusion on their own. What happens, and what we see again and again and again, is there has to be some type of external event that causes them to realize that, hey, I must do something different. Sometimes there's about 15 different events that we've seen again and again, actually now 16 because we've realized one of them is pandemic,
Yeah.
worldwide pandemic.
Yeah. That
Apparently
wasn't
it's
on the
another
list.
one.
That wasn't on the list until a few months
Yeah,
ago. Yeah.
that was not on the list until until recently.
Uh,
However, things like their good friend or family member has had a health scare. They've personally had a health scare. They've had another child. They have lost a parent. Their company has had a merger, or they got a new boss. Any number of these 15 different things cause them to begin to reassess what they've been feeling already for a long period of time. And they come to the conclusion, like, I can't continue to do this same thing. Because usually what happens is they kind of go through this up and down cycle of like, this is pretty tolerable. Like I can do this. And then, a week later, they're like, oh my goodness,
I can't do this
like,
anymore.
this is just so meaningless.
Yeah.
Like kind of the same impact that I was having when I was like immersed in the data. I'm like, oh, this is like, I cannot do this. But they go through that up and down, almost roller coaster again and again. And a lot of the times their performance is still exceeding what their bosses and company standards are. So nobody is digging into it any further. Everybody just assumes that these top performers are in great shape. And then to some degree, it is a little bit of a surprise when they want to leave. And these are people that also are very loyal. So often these are people that'll give 6 months notice, as opposed to like, hey, I'm leaving tomorrow. We'll see you.
Yeah.
Peace.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
You left, you gave a year notice. Like I've
Yeah.
done that same exact thing. I've left 3 roles where I gave more than 6 months notice. And that's what we see. And that's really cool. And that's amazing. Also, often the employers were not anticipating that when they got that, year notice or whatever it is. So
I could keep on digging into this, but what I want to do, and I've gone way beyond the time that I said I would keep you, but this has been great. But I do want to touch, the one things that I want to touch on, you talk about the 6 keys to career happiness.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of go through what those 6 keys are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've touched on a couple of them, or at least pieces of a couple of them along the way. And we divide them up into 6 categories. So number 1 is what we call engaging work. And that sounds really buzzwordy, but when we're talking about engaging work, we're talking about freedom to do, or freedom to decide how the work gets done. And this is actually so fascinating because this one matters almost more than ever. This is, I think, what is causing the trend for so many people who want to own businesses or do their own thing in many different ways that we see all over the place. It's less about owning a business or doing your own thing and more about wanting to have the autonomy to make the decisions about how the work gets done. And this is so cool because this is something that so many managers and leaders we see are like, oh my goodness, I don't want to make all of the decisions for this thing. And on the other side, people want this so badly. They're like, I want to make more decisions about how the work gets done. Like, I wish they could just dictate to me what the results are that they want and let me figure out like how to get there. So it's a really weird thing. We even see it actually linked up in how people are more or less healthy. There's even some loose links to this one for heart disease. So really, really, really interesting. But engaging work are things like freedom to decide how work gets done and that autonomy, feedback on how you're doing, and do you know whether or not you're winning, like we were talking about earlier, clarity in what's expected, and that variety. And then another category are removing out things that are high dissatisfiers for all of us as human beings. Like, there are not too many people in the world that absolutely love a commute over 60 minutes. Like I cannot wait, unless their job is that horrible where they're like, I cannot wait to get in the car so I can have my commute. But for most of us, we're like, okay, all right, this commute it gets old after a while. Maybe you can do it for a period of time, but eventually there's going to be an expiration date. So that's an example of a dissatisfier that makes an otherwise amazing situation not so great over a period of time. And then extremely long hours, just back to back to back to back. Like, for example, my first role where I was working between 80 to 90 hour weeks. I wasn't getting much sleep, but that was a consistent thing for many, 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 many months until I finally got the courage to do something about it and eventually got fired from that role. However, how you are helping, or rather, do you directly see and connect how you're helping others? You could argue that every single role in the entire world that you get paid for is helping human beings in some way or another, whatever it is. But if you don't directly see and connect how you're helping, there's going to be a period of time
Yeah.
where it's going to feel not as meaningful or less fulfilling. So that's
Yeah.
another area. Work that leverages what we call your signature strengths. And we didn't delve into what we consider to be the definition of signature strengths too much, but you can just think about that as almost that intersection of, those things that you're predisposed to be great at, those areas that are underneath the surface, like we're talking about earlier, where it combines with where you can deliver an incredibly high value or contribution to the world. And then also those areas that um, are enjoyable for you. And I'm not, again, talking about like, hey, I'm great at golf, and I
Right.
enjoy golf. I'm talking more about, I can't stop thinking about the future and all of these
Yeah.
different I can't stop making up words. I do that. My team makes fun of me all the time. They're like, Scott made up a new word. But it's something that's built into it. Like, I can't stop doing it. Those are the things we're talking about when we say signature strengths. So work that leverages your signature strengths, and then work that matches up with what you value most personally. Your
Yeah.
highest priorities in your life, your real priorities, not the ones that we say are priorities. If there's a disconnect between, what living your values, living your priorities, and what you're actually doing, then it's not going to feel much more happy or meaningful for any length of time. And so I think I hit on all of them.
Yeah. Okay. Now
Yeah.
it's I think it's really interesting because, and so much of that is so much of that is not about the job, the package, the remuneration. I mean, they're a bit of a given in a sense that okay, that they're going to be there thereabouts, but it actually is, there's so much of that that is internal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the important piece, that it's actually got to feel right, it's got to be right for you, and that's not a necessarily an intellectual exercise. Well, it's a combination of intellectual but it's also emotional, and that's the important piece to get. Scott, this has been great. I've kept you way longer than I said I would, but it has been really interesting. And I think I'd love to come back into another one because there's lots of things here. I thought I'd love to dig into that, and I thought we'll never
I'd
get
be
through
happy to.
the time. But before we wrap up, you can tell where people can get in touch with you. 2 questions I ask everybody: a book that has made an impact upon you, and why?
I knew you were going to ask this question, and still my mind is frantically. I had one picked out earlier, but now I'm questioning. So, one of the books that made, as crazy as it sounds, one of the books that made one of the largest impacts on me was um, The Power of, actually, here, I have it right here. I was looking for it on my bookshelf and couldn't find it. The Power of Habit. This is by
Yeah,
Charles Duhigg. And
great book.
yeah, great book, great book. One of the reasons it was so powerful for me was helping me think about that every aspect of this is not just about, well, let's take career change as an example, since we were talking about like what makes a better career for someone, or the ideal career for someone. And part of it is finding the right role, right company, right set of people, right, all of those things, getting the pieces on the chessboard in the right place, if you want to think about it that way. But part of it is you have to behave different. You have to change how you're interacting with work.
Mm.
And that's behavior and skill related. So you can get all the pieces on the chessboard in the right place and still be poor at holding your boundaries, drawing boundaries, and overwork yourself to death. Like, that is like every other thing can be perfect. And if you're not great at some of the other pieces and changing your behaviors to do work in a way that is much better and ideal for you, then it makes the other pieces not as good. So there's 2 sides.
It is
And
great,
that's
but
the book.
actually, I think I agree. It's a fantastic book, and it's actually one that when you say it to me, I just think, God, Scott, I must go back and read that again because it is a fantastic book. But when we're talking about the power of habit, daily rituals, do you have them? What are they, and what do they do for you?
I They've shifted over the years. My current ritual is I get up and I either write, journal, or work on something that I'm excited about during the first hour of the day. because that gets me jazzed up for one, to wake up the next morning, and then two, it gets me jazzed up for the whole rest of the day at the same time. And then I have at 7:15 a.m. I have an accountability call with my good friend. Actually, also has a great podcast, Dave Stakoviak from Coaching for Leaders. We chat for 15 minutes every day, and we declare what are the most important pieces in either our business or our life for that we're going to work on or accomplish or focus on that day. And then from there, I go and I work out with my family, now my whole family, in fact, since everybody's at home during this time. And then take a shower, and then the rest of my day starts at 9 for whatever I have on the schedule.
Yeah, great to have those sort of rituals. They really kind of set up your day, and that's the whole purpose of them, which I think is fantastic. Scott, this has been fantastic. I'm really so grateful to you for giving the time. Where can people reach out and get in touch with you? We'll have everything in the show notes, but if they're listening right now, where they can get in touch?
Happen to Your Career is the very best place. You can go to happentoyourcareer.com. And if you want to learn more about any of the things we've talked about, the podcast is a great resource. Searching the Happen to Your Career podcast, HAPPEN, Happen to Your Career podcast is available everywhere. And we dive deep into all the pieces that make truly fulfilling and meaningful work. And that's a great way to become familiar with us too. But you can always contact me directly as well, by email, or all of our information is on our website and our podcast.
That's fantastic. Scott, thank you so much. It's been a real honor. I definitely will come back again because I want to come back and dig into some of the other subjects. But for now, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.